It's now my privilege to introduce Professor Bernard Stiegler. He is the director of the Department of Cultural Development at the Georges Pompidou Center in Paris and is also a professor at the University of Technology of Compiègne, where he teaches philosophy. He's the author of a number of landmark works, including probably his best-known work, the 3-volume opus, Technics in Time. And that is a book in which he argues that there is no human without tools, without technology, or what the Greeks called techne, or which Stiegler calls technics, that our being human, the condition of human being, is constituted through and with our prosthetics. So please join me in welcoming Bernard Stiegler.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I speak about hermeneutics, heuristics, and Paideia in the digital Epistémè. The advent of the digital amounts to radical transformation of what Michel Foucault called the Epistémè, founded on archaeology. The digital can be compared to the printing press because the advent of printing press transformed knowledge of all kinds. But long before either of these events, the advent of handwritten alphabetical writing made possible the birth of so-called rational knowledge. This is a video book. I will explain later what I call a video book. And I spoke about Michel Foucault. Long before the printing press, the advent of handwritten alphabetical writing made possible the birth of so-called rational knowledge. Rational knowledge is a type of knowledge for which geometry is canonical. And geometry is what alphabetical writing made possible, just as it made possible public law. Reason of what the Greeks called logos, is itself fundamentally shaped by the experience of geometry insofar as it is a canon of demonstration, that is, of logical truth. The geometrical truth, however, could not have been conceived without the practice of writing. This is what Edmund Husserl showed in 1936. My own thesis is that writing is necessary for the formation of not just of geometry, but of logos itself as conceived by the Greeks. What is called reason in Greece is a form of attention, and attention itself is an arrangement operating between what Husserl referred to as retentions, R here, that is memories, and protensions, P in this formula, that is expectations, via the intermediary of what I call of technical retentions, that is mnemotechnics, which I call tertiary retentions. Alphabetical writing, like digital writing, is a type of tertiary retention. Attentional forms, which constitute ways of thinking, are arrangements of retentions and protensions made possible by mnemotechnical forms of memorization, that is tertiary retention. Thinking, in all its forms, is a temporal fabric of what Husserl called primary and secondary retentions and protensions. A temporal flow or flux, such as, for example, a speech that you might listen to, as in fact you are doing it at this very moment, can only constitute itself as such because it is an aggregation of what Husserl called primary retentions. In the course of this speech that I am delivering before you, and that you seem to be listening to, you retain a primary way each of the elements that are presented. Primary here means that each element that presents itself in each instant aggregates itself to the element that follows it in the next instant and is retained in it, with which it forms the now of the temporal flow. Hence phonemes that aggregate to form a word. Words that aggregate to form a sentence. Sentences that aggregate to form a paragraph, and so on, so that a unity of meaning is formed. These aggregations that accumulate one upon the other form what Husserl called primary retentions. These primary retentions are, however, selections. They are retained only on the basis of retentional criteria. Criteria that are formed in the course of my prior experience. And my experience is precisely an accumulation of secondary retentions, which are former primary retentions that subsequently become past, and which constitute the stuff of my memory. Each and every one of you who are currently listening to me will be hearing in what I say something different. And this is so because what I say is a flow of primary retention from out of which each of you make a different selection. To the degree that each of you have different memories, composed of different secondary retentions, resulting of different criteria for retaining and understanding what I tell you. Each one of you pays attention to what I say, therefore, in a singular way. But what nonetheless unites your different ways of hearing, I'm sorry, I should connect it because it's okay. Thank you. If not, oh no, it doesn't work. No problem. It's not the good connection. So, excuse me. Each one of you pays attention to what I say, therefore, in a singular way, I said. But what nonetheless unites you, your different ways of hearing what I say, and thus ensures the possibility of forming an agreement between all your various understandings of what I tell you is a rational attentional form. The latter is formed through apodictic experience, of which geometry is canonical example. Is the canonical example, on the basis of which my speech tries to bring about an agreement between you. This process, which is made possible by the literal, that is, lettered tertiary retention that emerged around the 8th century before Christ in the Mediterranean basin, constitutes an attentional form through which a rational transindividuation process is produced. It disappeared. I don't understand why. I'm sorry. I have a problem with the laptop. It disappeared now. This process, which is made possible by the literal, that is lettered tertiary retention, I said, that emerged around 8th century before Christ in the Mediterranean basin, constitutes an attentional form through which a rational transindividuation process is produced. To clarify this point, I must introduce concepts that derive from yet another philosopher, Gilbert Simondon, who showed that to individuate psychically is always to contribute to a collective individuation, and that this psychosocial individuation generates the trans-individual, that is, shared meanings or signification, which are equally collective secondary retentions, and which always themselves support presuppose supports or carriers that enable them to be transmitted through time. These supports or carriers are technical objects in general, and hypomnesic techniques in particular. Hypomnesic technologies, such as writing, amount to spatial projections of events that are firstly psychic and as such temporal. More generally, all technical supports, objects, and practices are the results of a process of technical individuation. This is why psychic and collective individuation is always also a technical individuation. This means that noetic psychic individuation, that is thinking, is conditioned by technical individuation, but not determined by it. The technical artifacts always opens a field of indefinite possibilities. This field of possibilities ranges from the worst to the best, because the technical artifact, for example, writing, is a pharmacon, a poison that can become a remedy or vice versa. Any tertiary retention, whatever it may be, is always a spatialization of temporal experience. Tool making, for example, is a spatial concretization of the time of the gestures through which the tool is fabricated. In the same way, alphabetical writing makes possible the spatialization à la lettre, in letters, of geometric reasoning as a series of movements of thought, which can, according to Husserl, become apodictic only on this condition, because this reasoning can thus control the temporalization that is geometric thinking by spatializing it as it forms it. This control to the letter, which is a grammatization of the very time of thinking, and which results in a recording of the synaptic circuits of the literate mind, as shown by Marianne Wolf, is the condition of the apodictic coherence that grounds Western reason on the base that is the reading brain, for speaking with the words of Marianne Wolf. All forms of thinking found on Earth are distinguished by, and as such, arrangements of primary, secondary, and tertiary retentions and potentions. It followed that members of Paleolithic society do not think in the same way as do those who belong to shamanic society, where the shaman works with instruments, that is, tertiary retentions. For example, this soul catcher, who in turn think differently from those who belong to an ideographic society or an alphabetical society of handwritten manuscripts, or the society of the printing press, and so on. As for we ourselves, we live in a society dominated by digital tertiary retentions, which reproduce voluntarily or otherwise as personal data, but which becomes less and less personal and more standardized because it is controllable by systems, by hidden and performative top-down systems, such as those that reticular writing establishes via those systems that control what is referred to as big data. It was Plato who first said that writing, and more generally all hypomnesic tertiary retention, such as the digital, is a pharmacon. Plato claims to submit writing to the control of the dialectic. This presumes, however, that the dialectic does not itself need writing in order to exist. And what Jacques Derrida showed is that no such assumption is possible. By believing in the possibility of controlling writing with something that actually has writing as its condition, Plato was intoxicated by a pharmacon that, by causing him to believe in the possibility of controlling it, created the metaphysical illusion par excellence. The delusion that it would be possible to eliminate the toxicity of the pharmacon. The toxic and curative possibilities of the pharmacon are always distributed through the establishment of this or that pharmacon as dominant and characteristic of an epoch, such as the era of handwritten alphabetic writing. These possibilities put to work the two irreducible tendencies active in all transindividuation processes, through which not only psychic but collective retentions and pretensions are formed, metastabilized, transmitted and transformed. It is ensembles of these that constitute knowledge. Transindividuation results from a composition between the tendency towards synchronization, that is stabilization, and the tendency towards diachronization, that is destabilization. In the Phaedrus and the Republic, Plato defines philosophy as a medicine for the soul, that is, as a therapeutic. But for Plato, this in no way means that philosophy is an art that deals with the pharmacological situation characteristic of mortals who emerge from the forgetting of Epimetheus and the theft of Prometheus, as told in Protagoras, one of the earliest dialogues of Plato. A decade before the Phaedrus and the Republic, in the myth of Prometheus and Epimetheus, as told in Protagoras, and as opposed to the metaphysical view that prevails in the Republic, the therapeutic was conceived as a hermeneutic, that is, as an art of interpretation that Hermes provides to mortals. This mythology constitutes the essence of tragic culture, as shown by Jean-Pierre Vernon. The tragic is represented here by the serpent, which is a symbol of the pharmacon and which adorns the caduceus of Hermes. By the time of the Phaedrus and the Republic, Plato, on the contrary, attempts to obliterate this hermetic and hermeneutic situation, that is, a tragic situation inaugurated by the theft of fire, that is, by the ambivalence of the pharmacon. In the Republic, this repression is translated politically as a political implementation of the epistemological discourse on the essence of the dialectic that is laid out in the Phaedrus, where the dialectic is defined as that which, preceding writing, can thoroughly control and totally eliminate its toxic effects, and this amounts to replacing hermeneia with the dialectic. Founded on the repression of the role of the pharmacon, that is writing, in the formation of the literate mind, which alone, according to Husserl, is capable of geometrizing apodictically, which is also to say of dialecticizing in the Platonic sense, or of dialogizing in the Socratic sense, that is anamnesically. The program of Plato's academy is to form what modernity calls ratio, reason. In referring to the literate mind, Waterholm showed that, like Husserl, that the formation of philosophical reason occurs through the arrangement of retentions and pretensions, made possible and metastabilized à la lettre, in letters, that is, made possible and metastabilized by literal tertiary retention, which constitutes the technological milieu, firstly, of Greek logos, then of modern reason, but in the latter case via the printing press, that is massively distributed and where mechanical reproduction is completely different from the interpretation that was the gloss, the commentary. It is only because this logos is a techno-logos, that is also the toxic potential of a regressive power, that the pharmacological being, that is the noetic soul, must constantly decide what is curative, good, just, true, but also what is useful or harmful in the toxic situation itself. And all this is possible only because the pharmacon that tertiary retention constitutes itself conditions the arrangements of psychic as well as collective secondary retentions and protensions. Knowledge, properly speaking, occurs only on the condition that psychic retentions and protensions become collective and social retentions and protensions. It is in this precisely that the process of transindividuation consists, a process that is made possible by the pharmacon. Rational, in the Greek sense, noetic transindividuation constitutes academic knowledge on the basis of dialogical processes, which are co-individuation processes between two or more psychic individuals who form anamnesic circuits, that is, who reactivate the entire circuit of a chain of knowledge accumulated from axioms in the form of collective retentions and protensions. And it is such anamneses that are played out in the Socratic dialogues. Such logical and anamnesic transindividuation, however, presupposes publication in the form of literal tertiary retentions that are accessible to community of peers, that the citizens of the city in principle form, and within this political community, accessible to the community of geometers, the community of philosophers, and so on. Such communities, by publishing and tracing transindividuation processes in lettered form, exposes these peer communities to critique. This public critique is judgment in Greek doctrinon, and it is the condition of possibility of logos as the power and knowledge of noetic expression. Modernity, where modern reason appears as rational, unfurls only when printing writing becomes reproducible and widely accessible to the community of peers that is referred to as the Republic of Letters, and that forms a new process of transindividuation, through which Western Europe undertakes a global and unprecedented territorial expansion, notably through the missions of the Society of Jesus that exported around the world, and notably in South America. The intellectual technologies emerging from the printing press in terms of grammars and dictionaries. All this, as Sylvain Roux has shown, constitutes a new stage of the grammatization of minds. The realization of this program is then shaped by the new conditions for the formation of noetic attention that come with the creation in the West and its colonies of the schools of Reformation, then Jesuit colleges, then, especially in France, national and secular public schools, and academic systems of education and scientific research founded on the apparatus of mass publication, which appeared during the 19th century, along with printed newspapers, and that enabled the printing and distribution of academic textbooks and popular publishing of all kinds up to the paperback. At the same time, however, there occur, firstly, transformations in the ways of reading resulting from the daily publication of what becomes information or entertainment, but no longer knowledge. And secondly, a break with these ways of reading when the analog media, which appear at the beginning of the 20th century, make possible the development of a new consumerist industrial society founded on the communication industries. Together, these transformations of and breaks with ways of reading organize a new age of the capture and formation of attention that is to a great extent a deformation of attention, in that it bypasses and short-circuits the various instances of the constitution of arrangements of psychic collective and hypomnesic retentions and pretensions, in which consists the transindividuation processes inherited from political noises and founded on apodictic experience. There is not enough time now to develop this point, that it would nevertheless be necessary to analyze it in detail in order to conceive how digital tertiary retention could be socialized noetically. Under what conditions can digital pharmaca, the production and exploitation of which now constitutes the core of industry, which is thus becoming above all an industry of retentions and pretensions. Under what conditions can these forms of industrial tertiary retention, that are digital pharmaca, which solicit, treat, and redistribute via digital retentions primary and secondary psychic and collective retentions and pretensions, under what conditions this can be socialized noetically and not regressively? In recent years, higher education teaching practices have appeared that are based on digital networks and that are referred to nowadays as massive open online courses. These raise 100 questions, including, in particular, that of certification and the constitution of credits for students whose courses are supposed to form psychic apparatuses according to the canon of rational attention formation. Do MOOCs contribute to a noetic socialization of digital tertiary retention, or are they, on the contrary, a regression when compared to noetization by the letter? Are their pharmacological characteristics poisonous or curative? A better understanding of these questions requires an understanding of what constitutes the specificity of digital tertiary retention with regard to the formation of academic circuits of transindividuation, and such that they tend to conform to the apodictic canon of rationality. Digital technology, which, according to Clarice Ehrenschmidt, establishes the age of reticular writing, is based on the computer, which more than anything is an artificial organ of automated categorization. That is, that automatically produces digital tertiary retentions on the basis of other digital tertiary retentions. The automation of categorization makes it possible to delegate operations of analysis and understanding to digital systems, from very simple operations, such as scanning for occurrences of a word in a text, to far more complex ones, such as modeling quantum objects in physics, for example, or the calculation of correlations in big data. Delegating such operations to machines has the following consequence. The certification processes, in which all transindividuation processes always consist, are altered, and in some cases dangerously short-circuited. It is not just that the analytic capacities of the understanding are delegated to machines, but that the synthetic capacities of reason are utterly wiped out. However, in the case of nanophysics, the conditions of intuition are artificially reconstituted by the understanding, the quantum scale being inaccessible to intuition, as you know. In Kant, Immanuel Kant, understanding, intuition, and reason are faculties on the basis of which true judgment is possible, and only on these conditions. These are faculties that digital writing profoundly transforms, either by delegating them to machines, as is the case with automated understanding, or by replacing them with machines, as is the case for the simulation of nanometric objects, or by purely and simply destroying reason as a faculty of synthesis, at the risk of unleashing an analytic understanding devoid of reason, but not of power. Rational synthesis is a process of individuating interpretation that cannot be reduced to calculation, even though, like the poem, it necessarily involves calculation, that is, analysis. It is hermeneia that reason puts into play, and reason, beyond the analysis of the understanding, is the faculty of choosing between pharmacological possibilities delineated from out of an infinite array of possible circumstances, and it is therefore a matter of going beyond analysis. Reason is that which judges, in the strong sense of this term, that which decides by going beyond analysis, that is, it is that which interprets and which, as such, individuates itself noetically. This means that interpretation cannot be delegated to an analytical system of tertiary retentions. It, on the contrary, always consists in deciding between possibilities opened up by tertiary retentions, but does that these tertiary retentions are not themselves capable of choosing between, however automated they may be. For here, to choose means precisely to dis-automatize, that is, to create what Gilles Deleuze called a bifurcation. In Kant, the difference between analysis and synthesis grounds the difference between understanding and reason. I have argued that analytical understanding is made possible by tertiary retentions insofar as they belong to a process of grammatization, such as the analysis of this written poem, an analysis made possible by writing. Grammatization being the discretization, reproduction, and spatialization of temporal flows. But synthesis, too, is made possible by analytic tertiary retentions. They affect the noetic psychic individual because spatialized. They trace and make public potential conflicts of interpretation, pharmacological conflicts between peers that affect these noetic individuals. And these affects, the critical convergence of which is called reason, are what trigger interpretations. It is from this perspective that we should reread Spinoza today. The process of transindividuation is what certifies the arbitration of these conflicts. Certification processes are themselves either analytic or synthetic. And in this case, they are elaborated on the basis of interpretations that result in categorical inventions. Hermeneia is, in fact, that which, through glosses and commentaries of all kinds, invents and generates new categories, whether analytic or synthetic, through which knowledge is transformed. New categories are certified when they are recognized by peers via analytic certifications that may on occasion be automated, but synthetic certifications, which result in categorical inventions provoking bifurcations, can never be delegated to systems, precisely because they are processes of interpretation. What does this mean for the design of books and books, new books? Circuits of rational transindividuation are anamnesic in the Socratic sense because they are ideally compatible with all certified circuits to which they are connected and of which they reactivate the originary meaning. And as we have seen, these certifications rest on categorization processes of all kinds, from Aristotle's table of categories to classifications, taxonomies, terminologies, descriptions and specifications, and passing through disciplinary divisions, hierarchies, ontologies, in all their forms, including those of today's automobile industry, as well as set theory, the mathematical theory of categories based on the concept of functor, and so on. Knowledge is composed of terms, and of rules of interpretation implementing these terms, which themselves constitute categories. The inscription of a new circuit of transindividuation extends an existing circuit, constituting a new categorical proposition founded on a bifurcation. And the word category must not be understood only in the Aristotelian and Kantian senses. Categories are not just Aristotle's way of saying being or Kant's pure concepts of understanding. Any original semantic production involves a possible categorical production. The condition of an effective categorical production on the basis of a semantic production that makes it possible is the grammatization process that began in the Upper Paleolithic era as a spatial and discretized projection of temporal mental contents that thus become reproducible and that therefore metastabilize as collective secondary retentions, projecting outside the mind, if not outside the psyche. As technologies of automated categorization that form the most recent stage of grammatization, digital retention profoundly transforms the cerebral and noetic activities of rational categorization. How does this delegation of the analytical faculties of understanding to digital retentional systems provide hope for a new age of reason? That is, a new capacity for interpretation, for hermeneia, and with it, of idiomatic differentiation and individuation, given that all semantic categorical invention is an idiomatic differentiation supported by a psychic individuation. All knowledge as a set of collective secondary retentions remains incomplete, and as such, interpretable. And this is why it is always traversed by conflicts of interpretation about its future, through which controversies take shape. What is shared analytically is not the subject of interpretation, whereas what is shared synthetically remains to be interpreted. And psychic singularities project themselves into these hermeneutic possibilities by inscribing in them their idiomatic differences. I refer here to the idiomaticity of those well-made languages that, according to Condillac, are the sciences, and I do so from a point of view that is obviously not Condillac's own view. These idiomatic differences produced by the hermeneutic activity of each scholar, insofar as he or she thinks or for himself or herself, tend to become grouped into schools of thought on the basis of noetic affinities. We have seen that tertiary, I will conclude now, we have seen that tertiary retentions, insofar as they enable the spatialization of noetic flows, condition the hermeneutic and heuristic exercise in which living knowledge always consists. A literal gloss or commentary is a fundamental dimension of the rational attentional form. With digital tertiary retentions, which are formal and automated systems of traceability, new attentional forms and new attentional peer communities are made possible by the making public of individual and collective interpretations of what the genesis of circuits of transindividuation that are formed, and of the genesis, and of the genesis of circuits and of interpretation that are formed. In the academic world, courses and seminars should become sites of the interpretation of the teaching generating in the course of note-taking realized with relevant technologies, then the polemical editorialization of these notes, contributive processes of categorical invention. Peer communities would therefore form through controversies that function as genuine peer review systems, certified by teachers and by the practice through which students become genuine contributors to their teachers' research and are initiated into research, as should be the case for all university teaching, in my opinion. This conception ought to constitute the architectural principle for MOOCs designed from a rational point of view. These MOOCs thus form a new organological system of knowledge, that is, an ensemble of digital intellectual technologies that lead, in the case of MOOCs, to the publication of video books, which are also books supported by social networks of readers and controversies, social books. All this demands a profound reconsideration of the characteristics of the web itself. The latter is, in fact, now a system for calculating and eliminating all incomparable differences, that is, for erasing controversies and short-circuiting interpretations, because marketing doesn't want interpretation. MOOCs and all rational and academic practices of digital tertiary retention therefore introduce contributive, interpretative, and heuristic practices, and along with it, contributive certification processes. The Institute for Research and Innovation, of which I am the manager, works in this way towards the design of platforms for note-taking, glosses, contributive indexing, and editorialization of digital audiovisual temporal flows, which through contributive categorization can be transformed into spatio-temporal objects, that is, into video books and social books. Tertiary retention requires the implementation of a new research policy and the organization of graduate schools that feed into the design of a noetic digital organology, constituting the field of so-called digital studies. These graduate schools should become sites of digital publication, supporting contributive categorization processes, that is, constituting contributive interpretative seminars that explicitly articulate the bottom-up with the top-down, drawing on transindividuation technologies dedicated to the contributive categorization and publication of research, for example, in the form of video books and audiobooks of this type. This is my course in my online open course in pharmacon.fr I created 4 years ago. More generally, this work should feed into a new conception of the web, founded on the graphic language of hermeneutic categorizations of the data emerging from this reticular writing. This is what the Institute for Research and Innovation is working on in cooperation with the University of Tokyo, the Federal Science Policy of Belgium, and the French Ministry of Higher Education now, and perhaps soon with England, Ecuador, maybe Germany, and why not California, and in order to build a digital republic encompassing Asia, America, Europe, and the rest of the world. Thank you for your attention.